three resolutions. I'd like, if with your permission, to do resolution B and C together, and then we'll do D separately. The first is a resolution authorizing the general counsel to execute contracts on behalf of the university to purchase unarmed security guard services from Allied Barton Security Services, Andrews International, FJC Security Systems, Securitas Security Systems USA, and U.S. Security Associates, Inc., without competitive bidding and pursuant to law and university regulations. Such contract shall not exceed a total estimated cost of $12.6 million for the period March 2011 through December 2011. I am going to take these separately. Do I have a motion? I'll move.
Question? Why is it without competitive bidding?
I want to give everyone some background on this issue, if I can, share a little bit. This item is put on here, and it has urgency to it because previously, for many, many years, the university, the colleges have been able to purchase security services, contract guards, through a contract with the State Office of General Services. Some of the unions, most notably a local 32BJ, have protested against this contract from the Office of General Services at the state, mainly because we have been paying the state prevailing wage rate instead of the city prevailing wage rate. The state prevailing wage rate is about $15 an hour. The city prevailing wage rate is about $25 an hour. So there's quite a significant gap. The state Office of the State Controller and the Office of General Services has decided that they're no longer going to be in this business, and that we can no longer use this contract for our colleges to contract out. And the agreement ended as of March 9th, 2011. These 5 firms that we have noted here as part of the resolution have agreed to continue services until we can get a new contract in place, and that's what we're asking for approval here. And this will take us through the end of the calendar year. And so now we will be paying the city prevailing wage. We're doing a couple of things to try to bring the cost down as much as possible. We're putting out an invitation for bid so that we can try to get 1 or 2 vendors to give us best pricing rather than have all 5. But these are the 5 that are currently providing services to our colleges. They'll continue providing services to the end of the calendar year. And then by that time, we'll have hopefully an invitation for bid out for having 1 or 2 vendors provide the services university-wide.
Simultaneously, we're taking a look at using something called a CSA title, which we have, which will allow us to hire part and full-time people at a lower level title than peace officer, and the salary for that title is consistent with the state prevailing wage rather than the state wage.
So this is for temporary purposes because we're already 1 month into this.
Correct.
To just have it through December.
Mm-hmm.
What's the timing of the RFP? Sometime before the end of summer, beginning of school term?
Yeah, the IFB should be out within the next couple of weeks, and hopefully then we'll be able to have a new contract in place by the beginning of the calendar year.
So, point of information, if I may. How many of these security services are there that would be possible competitive bidders? Is it such a small, closed industry, or do we have real competition out there?
I don't believe so. I think these 5 do represent the firms that are there here in New York City that do provide the service. I don't know how many more.
These are 5 that were authorized by the Office of General Services in the state. There are a number of smaller agencies, and there probably are a few larger agencies, but I think you would have a sufficient number clearly to do a competitive bid, and that's one of the things that the state controller will look at as well. But we believe from our past experience that there are a sufficient number of firms that would be able to meet the needs of the university.
Anything that we could do for our own students at John Jay on a part-time basis, perhaps?
The John Jay students do provide security services at that campus.
I know that.
And the folks at John Jay have suggested utilizing the students at other campuses as well. So that it is something
Great
that's
experience for them.
being put under consideration.
I would suggest we go further than that to do it in executive session. Then we get into labor relations policy.
Okay. It was just a
Did you suggest
thought,
moving the
throw it out
voting?
there.
No, we'll still vote.
No.
Right.
I have
Yeah,
no further
yeah.
questions.
Right. Well, we should talk about that later in executive session. Are there any other questions? By the way, in response to my personal experiences, this is a very competitive market,
Okay, good.
from both the number of former and retired NYPD officers to,
Yeah.
they're great. There's a great number of them here in New York. Was there a second?
So moved.
Call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Action item C is a resolution authorizing the general counsel to execute a contract on behalf of the university to purchase enterprise library membership and various online database and cataloging services from Online Computer Library Center, Inc., OCLC. Such purchase shall not exceed a total estimated cost of $1.8 million for the 3-year term of July 1, 2011 through June 30th, 2014. This contract with OCLC will permit the continuation of mission-critical, university-wide library services currently provided by NY Link, who is phasing out operations in June of 2011. Motion to move first?
So moved.
Questions? The 3-year contract, I thought we were going to try the 3-year contract with the right to change it every year, if in fact we thought the market had changed.
Yeah.
Did we do that for something
Yeah,
else,
I think we
Joe?
did.
I think we did.
These are estimated costs for the 3-year term, and not to exceed the $1.8 million. So if things do change in terms of the pricing, we do have the opportunity to make changes there.
Okay.
Or if another vendor.
And this is what we were paying under NYLink as well. This is the contract price that we were paying, so there's no increase in the contract going to this new vendor.
Yeah. Any other further questions? Okay. We have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? No. The motion carries. Action item D is a resolution authorizing the university to increase the CUNY School of Law application for admission fee from $50 to $60, effective June 1st, 2011. To authorize the CUNY School of Law to accept such a fee through the processing facility of the Law School Admissions Council, LSAC, subject to normal LSAC processing fee, and that such fee may be waived by the Dean of the School of Law for any applicants whose law school admissions test fee was waived by LSAC or in the case of extreme financial hardship. The increase in fee is to be applied to handling of the online application process by LSAC. The increased fee is similar to what other law schools in the country charge and allows the City University School of Law to remain competitive with the market. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion carries. And now a report from Vice Chancellor Sapienza on the
Thanks.
state budget.
Thanks, Chair Levin. The state budget, as I'm sure you all know, was agreed to on March 31st. The governor and the legislature came to an agreement on an on-time budget. For the senior colleges, the reductions that were proposed in the executive budget carried through to the adopted budget. Just to walk through those numbers again, there was $11.9 million for the current year that the state rolled into next year as a reduction, plus an additional $83.2 million in new cuts, so it's a total of $95.1 million in reductions to senior colleges. The total over the last 4 fiscal years is now $300 million. So the senior college cuts remain. The one item on the senior colleges that changed significantly from the exec to the adopted is that the executive budget recognized the additional revenue that we were projected to collect from the 5% tuition increase that we imposed this spring. That was $40 million. The Assembly budget bill also recognized that. However, the Senate bill did not. And in the final budget agreement, the $40 million was not recognized in CUNY's budget. The governor and the legislative leaders have publicly committed to getting together post-budget and to try to resolve some of the outstanding higher ed issues for both SUNY and CUNY, one of which is developing a rational tuition policy for both SUNY and CUNY. And so we are hopeful that before our academic year starts later in late August, that we will have some resolution to this $40 million revenue issue. So that was the one major change from the adopted budget. We were able to have some good news in the adopted budget in that there was procurement reform for both SUNY and CUNY. We were able to go on a post-audit basis for purchasing of goods, not for services. We're still on pre-audit for services, but purchasing of goods, we're on a post-audit basis with the state controller and the attorney general's office, which is really going to help us in terms of getting instructional equipment and other goods into the schools a lot quicker than we were able to in the past. On financial aid, again, most of the executive budget recommendations carried forward into the adoption. There was a slight change for the definition of a remedial student for TAP purposes, which was the State Education Department definition, which is what we were pushing for, so that was an encouraging thing. On the community colleges, the governor had proposed a 10% cut in base aid, which was $226 per FTE. And that equates to about a $17.5 million funding loss for our community colleges. However, there was a restoration, a small restoration of that, I should say, in the adopted budget. It was $88 per FTE, which was restored. And so what that equates to for us is a funding loss of about $10.6 million. So instead of $17.5 million, we're having a funding loss for the community colleges of $10.6 million. And again, we talked on the senior colleges about over 4 years we've lost $300 million. On the community colleges, over 4 years, the funding per FTE has gone down from $2,675 per FTE to now the new rate of $2,122 per FTE. So we've lost over $550 per FTE over that time. On the city budget, the mayor issued his preliminary budget on February 17th. It contained a $16 million reduction to community colleges for next fiscal year. Subsequent to the mayor issuing his preliminary budget, he asked all city agencies for an additional round of cuts. And for CUNY and for most of the other non-uniformed and non-DOE agencies, it was 4%, which for us was an additional $7.6 million. So currently we're looking at potential reductions to the community colleges in city funds of $23.6 million for next year. We do have the maintenance of effort provision protection that helps us currently with this new round of cuts that the mayor has proposed. The city is about almost $30 million short of meeting the maintenance of effort for next year. And so once the budget's adopted, we will get some funding back, and so we do have that protection. And of course, the city council has always been very helpful to the university in the adopted budget process. But again, we are concerned about the community colleges with the state cuts that they've already sustained and with the proposed city cuts that are being proposed for next year.
Matthew, did I hear you correctly that currently the mayor's proposed budget is below the MOE, the maintenance of effort?
That's correct.
$30 million?
And historically, when the mayor has put forward his preliminary budget, the city's condition has been below MOE. Usually, even when the mayor issues his executive budget, it doesn't usually meet an MOE, because under the MOE law, the city of New York is required to meet the maintenance of effort, not the mayor. It's the mayor and the council. Last year, during the FY11 the mayor's executive budget actually did meet the MOE. It was the first time in a very long time that that happened. And so we're hopeful that that will happen again as part of this exec.
It's interesting, if in fact the mayor and the council adopt a budget that's below the MOE, I don't believe there's ever been a test case as to how to get it back up. So, I mean, that's why I was wondering, because you just said, well, I'll just have to give it to them. Yeah, good luck. But,
There actually was.
I do
years
remember
ago.
I do remember a few times when I was personally involved in going below the MOE.
There was the beginning of the case a few years ago when the city was under.
Mhm.
The city fairly quickly went back up.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay.
Any questions? Yes.
So, let me understand this. You indicated what we're down from the city and state, and then you also indicated that we didn't get the tuition increase. So do you add the tuition increase, or what we had projected to be from the tuition increase, onto these deficits? And that means, which I think, it increases that deficit by that amount if we don't get the tuition increase?
If we are not able to get access to that spending authority for that 40 million in the tuition increase, then yes, we would add that on. However, we have been told by folks in the governor's office, from the Senate, and from the Assembly that they will be having these discussions post-budget, and so we are optimistic that the 40 million problem will be resolved by the time our academic year opens.
Resolved because they'll increase spending, or resolved because they will approve the tuition increase?
Actually both, that they'll approve the tuition increase and therefore increase our spending authority by $40 million.
You know, it might be helpful, Mr. Chairman, if I could just take a few minutes to give the background here, as I did this morning with the Council of Presidents, to describe the circumstances that led to the tuition recommendation and the political swirling that resulted right at the end of the process. We must go back in time and remind this committee and to remind the board that fairly early on in the fiscal year, we knew that the IFR, Income Fund reimbursable. I knew the word, I just couldn't get it out of my mouth. Had a gap in our favor of about $20 million. The actual authority, the authorization that we had was about $145 million. These are cash-based accounts. And we had only envisaged spending about $125 million. When I was informed about this by Matt Sapienza and other people in the budget office, we saw this as an opportunity to use tuition, which I thought was the absolute appropriate thing to do. So we went to the board and we got authorization for 5%, which basically on an annualized basis resulted in a $40 million flow in our favor. We also said that we were doing this with incomplete information, and that after the governor made his recommendations, the understanding or the expectation would be that we would have to go above that 5%. So the board basically authorized 2 iterations above the 5%, one being 2% that we would do effective January 1 or July 1, consistent with the development of our budget request, because again, this was done before the governor presented his budget, and that another 3 percentage points as a hedge against the unknown. Whether we would do it or not would be subject to what the governor's budget began. Before we went to the board on the 5%, I personally had conversations with the very top people in the governor's office, the Senate, and the Assembly explained what I just explained to you. All of them said, fine. You have our blessing on this. We see no issue. At the end of the day, the governor included that additional $20 million in part of our base. The Assembly included it. The Senate did not. I described this as sort of a kabuki dance when I described this to the President this morning, because quite frankly, we still don't know what the politics were that was driving the Senate to do what they did. We essentially were caught in the crosshairs between what we thought were bargaining positions between the two houses of the state legislature, and we have some information about it, but we still don't have clarity as to why the decision was made by the Senate. It makes absolutely no sense in terms of any kind of the analytics that you would bring to this discussion. It was clearly issues dealing with maneuvering, and at some point we should be able to get to the bottom of it. We're going to need a tuition policy. I have the expectation that the governor's people will be very strongly supportive of a tuition policy for SUNY and CUNY. I will be meeting this week to start that discussion, and I am fairly confident that those discussions will be taken very seriously. We have a commitment from SUNY to work very closely with us in the way in which we have outlined the way that this would go. Alan, at my direction, asked to have a conference call today, actually a video conference call with SUNY to lay out the strategy. They're on board with us in the way in which the compact has always been viewed in terms of using the master plan as the vehicle to advance the goals. I'll be meeting with the governor's people this week, to discuss just that particular procedure. So I think we're confident that we will see the light of day. What's important for us is, before a rational policy is developed, we get this 5%, whether it's tuition or some other flow of revenue. We discussed other flows of revenue today with the presidents, and we'll be developing some of those procedures and bring them back at some point this spring to this committee. We have lots of options here, but it's important that we get this done before a rational policy is imposed, because if not, it'll just put us in a more compromised position relative to where we are with SUNY. The tuition now is different at the two systems. If we did not do what I just said, that gap will widen, and that's not a good thing. The other troublesome part of this whole discussion is TAP. CUNY is a couple of $100 away from piercing the $5,000 cap on TAP. SUNY is within $30, $25, $30 of piercing TAP. If this ceiling is increased to any significant way, this is serious money for the DOB, because it will open up all of the private institutions that are so far away from the cap right now, and that would be a flow of dollars that would obligate the state, and so that's a real problem for us. I think more than anything else, it is the TAP ceiling that is problematic, more so here than in SUNY. SUNY, this is a long answer, but I think it's deserving of, just so that you see the entire thing. SUNY was prepared last year to self-fund the delta between what would result from an increase in tuition to the $5,000. I think that's a bad strategy. I have made that point to SUNY. They have now backed away from that because I think once you open that door will only widen and compromise us and basically would discount the value of any tuition increase because we would have to eat something that we think should be the state's obligation. Superimposed on the discussion of a tuition policy is what the House of Representatives have passed on Pell Grants. There is a proposal to reduce the Pell Grant award by $845. That would be a significant problem for many of our students at CUNY. So the Pell problem, the TAP problem, is really, I think, a driver that we're going to have to face in terms of front wind in pushing a rational policy on tuition, because they really have to be acting in unison. They don't have to be correlated to 1.0, but they need to be highly positively correlated for these things to be comfortable with people who will be voting on this. So we have a problem on the 40. I think we'll be able to cover it by other mechanisms, if not getting this reinstated. The arguments are very much in our favor, but we're facing a bigger problem as we look at tuition on a going forward basis that would start effective July 1st.
I thought the tuition increase was supposed to go into effect this spring semester.
It is, and we collected that revenue, and there's no problem with that.
Okay.
And those dollars are embedded into our budget. The question is whether it will remain in our base effective July 1st. And we're hopeful that we will get that argument embraced. But at the same time, we need further tuition increases. I mean, this is a problem from a year ago. I'm looking prospectively at what we have to face starting July 1st. You know, $300 million has been extracted out of the senior college budgets in the last 4 years. That is not an insignificant amount of money. It is not sustainable to have an organization whose expenses increase and no sources of revenue to fill the gaps that have been created. So we definitely have to get this done, and I think politically we'll be in a much stronger position because of we convincing SUNY to march with us in unison here. You know, before there were differences, and as soon as you have differences, that's when people come in, put a wedge, put you apart, and then nothing happens.
Is SUNY still trying to differentiate between its campuses?
They're backed off of that position.
Okay. Thank you.
Long explanation,
No.
but I just thought it was
Very helpful.
important.
At this point, we exit the Committee on Fiscal Affairs and we go into the Subcommittee on Investment, where we'll take some items and then we'll go into executive session and then back to the Committee on Fiscal Affairs. So, the first item of business is the approval of the minutes from our meeting on February 7th for the Subcommittee on Investment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any changes, comments? Being none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And now, we all received memos in our package from Janet on the performance year-to-date.
Yes. Since we have a full agenda, we've decided to give a summary view of the performance calendar year-to-date through February and focus on a more detailed report at our next meeting in June when we have more results. But calendar year-to-date through February, the pool is up about 3.5%, and the portfolio now stands at about $165 million. All of the asset classes in the portfolio had positive returns with the exception of emerging market equities, which has been in negative territory for about the past 4 months. So in June, we will provide you with a lot of detail on the results to date then. In the meantime, we would like to go into executive session to address NIFA and changes to the policy.
Go into executive session at this point. Who needs to leave?
So for this discussion, if you try to also take page 12 in that red line document, because that'll state the age factor, so that'll make it easier to understand what we're going through here and see the actual age factors.
So I should say, I'll move the resolution first and we'll go through the factors.
You think we should go through the
I think we should
Well, let's go through
factors.
the presentation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tom,
Good.
where we are?
So just to start with the factors, you have them again on page 12 in your red-lined investment policy statement. I'll just read them very briefly. 1, the duration and preservation of the fund. 2, the purpose of CUNY and the fund. And again, the fund is the one we're planning to spend from. 3, general economic conditions. 4, the possible effect of inflation and deflation. 5, the expected total return from income and appreciation of investments. 6, other resources for CUNY. 7, where appropriate, alternatives to spending from that fund and the possible effects of those alternatives on CUNY. And 8, the principles and policies set forth in this investment policy. So again, we have to go through that for the 4 categories that we identified. So we aggregated all the funds under the pool into 4 different categories. The first one being scholarship and fellowships. So going through the 8 factors, and again, we'll do the first one is going to be the hard one, then the rest of them are going to be repetitive somewhat, and we don't have to repeat that. So the duration of preservation of the endowment fund, again, this is common for all the 4 categories. These are long-term funds. So the question here is, in order to preserve the funds, we need to spend prudently. We need to spend in a way that doesn't deplete the corpus. Given that the proposed spending rate is 5%, the expected return of the fund is 5.4%, net of inflation, etc. We do believe, it's certainly our opinion, that the 5% is prudent because it allows this intergenerational balance. You can also add that and we'll get to that in the next one. So that's basically it. It's from a long-term perspective, it is prudent to spend 5% for all of these 4. The purposes of the institution and the endowment funds are now again for the scholarship and fellowships. The idea here is that this is something that CUNY relies on. It is something that is donor designated, that these funds are reserved basically for the purpose of being paid out to recipients. And so it's important to the purpose of CUNY to have these funds. And that's basically it. The 5% is in accordance with that, and I assume in accordance with the well-being of CUNY and the students, etc. General economic conditions, again, these are long-term funds, so the spending rate shouldn't be set so much depending on what happens in any given year, but there could be years where something extraordinary has happened that makes us reconsider whether the 5% is prudent in this particular year. None of those things are currently here. There are certainly uncertainties. There will always be uncertainties in the economic world. There are things like the Japanese tsunami. There are things like the Libyan uprising that creates some uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future. But overall, the last couple of years, we've seen returns that have exceeded the 5%. We have no specific indications that will not be the case in 2011 as well. And so the overall assumption that the 5% is prudent remains. There's nothing extraordinary happening in this respect that would suggest otherwise. Again, that one is also one that is common for all the 4. There's nothing specific general economic conditions that are different from the different 4s. Possible effects of inflation and deflation. We're right now in a situation where we're sort of teetering between inflation and deflation. We haven't seen inflation come in yet. We think that, and I think the general consensus is that things are leaning more towards inflation than deflation, given the relatively strong economic growth that expected to come in the economy. But there are scenarios out there that could see deflation. But again, at this point, nothing points to extraordinary high inflation or deflation that might change the spending picture. So also from that perspective, the 5% is prudent. The expected total return from income and appreciation investments, we already talked about the expected long-term return being about 5.4% real. So from that perspective, and this is a total return concept that's embedded in the investment policy statement, so from that perspective, the 5% seems very prudent. Other resources of the institution, again here, these money, the endowment, the scholarship and fellowships are donor designated to this particular purpose, taking money from other places in CUNY and using them for fellowships and scholarships, given that the money is there and designated for spending, would not be, I guess, prudent, and makes the 5% spending prudent and common indeed. Again, any comments or objections or whatever, let me know as we go along. Alternative to expenditure of the endowment fund, basically the same can be said about no suitable alternatives being present to the spending of this money. It's important for the well-being of CUNY that these money be paid out in the 5% level. And finally, investment policy of CUNY. We know that we have the guideline of 5%. The proposed spending lives up to that guideline and is wholly consistent with the investment policy of CUNY and the overall well-being of the endowment funds. So that would be an example of how to go through the 8 factors for one of the specific categories. If we move on to the next one, would be academic support. The first one about the overall mission of CUNY is obviously the same. The next one, the purposes of the institution, the endowment funds might change slightly, but overall it still is academic support is still important for CUNY. The 5% represents a weight, balancing the interest of spending this particular money that is donor designated versus other spending, and so it is certainly we don't have, as Cambridge, we don't have an opinion, but I assume it's the opinion of the investment committee that this spending is prudent. Again, in terms of general conditions, in terms of inflation, deflation, the total return of the total fund, none of these changes from the individual categories. They're all common. So the only thing that might change for these would be 6 and 7, whether there are other resources of the institutions that might apply or alternatives to spending. Those might have slight nuances from whether we're talking about scholarship and fellowships or whether we're talking about academic support. But all in all, even for academic support, it's still the same outcome, that there really is no alternative to the spending as far as we understand.
Let me say, we were involved in crafting this, and as you listen to it, you see things you didn't see in the first instance, and I think we'll get better at doing this, because there's a certain unreality about this exercise imposed upon us by this law. And when you think of endowment funds, I'm just thinking about now for scholarships and fellowships, first of all, you have a duty to spend it. That's what it's there for. You couldn't say, we're not going to spend the endowment. I think donors would be all over you. That's, it's an element less important for you than other institutions. Harvard, Princeton, that's how their budget is formed. They don't have the luxury of saying, we're not going to spend it for the endowment. There are alternatives. And I think 2 of these things actually will probably almost never apply. 6 and 7, when they talk about other resources, as I think about it, and alternatives to expending, I think that's there for the exigent situation where there's a financial crisis, maybe where their funds are underwater, and then there's a real cost to continuing to dip in. So somebody might say a prudent board then has to look, is there another place we can look for this money? But in the routine, year in, year out spending decision, I frankly think, for example, 6 and 7 would probably almost never be relevant if you're simply spending normal endowment funds or scholarships, fellowships, academic support, because these are spent because you don't have the other resources. These resources exist precisely for that. So I think as you do this over a period of time, you're going to see more of this, where maybe you have a different take on it.
let's be clear about something, if I understand this. When we adopt the prudent 5% rule, and it sounds like a very logical thing to do, we're gonna spend 5% for those funds under the MIFA, right? Whether the 5% is there or not.
Well, yes, that's right.
That's correct, right? And
That
everyone
is-
understands that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I, Thomas, can I suggest that, that since most of these factors apply to all the funds, as you're going through the next two programs, is maybe just call attention to those where there are differences?
Yes. That was my intention, so yeah.
We're almost done.
Institutional support, as I understand it, that the category is work-study programs to support students that do not qualify for federal work-study programs. That is the purpose of this particular category. Again, something that's necessary. The 5% seems prudent in that respect. And as Dan pointed out, we're not in a situation, I assume, that where there are other resources or alternative to expenditure of these funds. This is necessary spending. Again, the other factors are all common for the others. And for instruction, same thing for the general factors. These are fellowships for faculty, and again, something that is necessary. The spending is necessary and mandated, and so something that should be observed. And there are no other resources and no alternative to expenditure of these particular funds. Obviously, anybody who wants to contribute to, but you can see how this is an exercise that becomes a little bit repetitive.
And these provisions are becoming more and more imperative in the life of the university. It's becoming more and more recently.
Get a vote. Do you want a motion? So, there's a resolution, which is in purple. I don't think I need to read it, but it's basically to make the amendments to our investment policy as well as the appropriation, the requirement for prudent and appropriate appropriation of 5%.
Move it.
Any questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We're now out of executive session. Or no, we're back. We're out of the subcommittee.
Going
Excuse me,
into the
we're going
fiscal.
into the committee. Sorry. I know, we've been out. One more thing, move which is basically.
Remove the same thing.
Right, we move the same thing as a resolution to authorize the Board of Trustees of the City University to accept the new investment policy and guidelines. Motion.
So moved.
Second. Any questions, comments? Being none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you.
Hallelujah.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we ask everyone who is not a member of the Student Affairs Committee to
get
move
out.
away from the table so we can get everything set up? Thank you very, very